Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, do you see this article? How it is entitled "Violence Against Women Surges During COVID-19 Crisis as the Senate Republicans Anti-Domestic Violence Law." Um, um, I'm reading part of it. They block it. Okay, so they block the anti-domestic violence law, and so I was actually looking at a different screen, but I want to just take a moment here. I guess the person that the journalist out of USA Today is Kanita Iyer or Liar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, so I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. And so I just want to say that this is not new. Let me read the article title again. At USA Today, violence against women surges during COVID-19 crisis as Senate Republicans block anti-domestic violence law. This right here, even when it wasn't blocked, has been highly ignored. And I'm just gonna be honest and say that I feel like it's ignored because women are ignored when it comes to our crises and our needs. And anytime it has to do with, for example, in the black community, when it's a male that's getting shot or killed by the police, it seems like everybody rushes to the aid of that situation. They rally cry, they protest. I noticed George Floyd, his protest was like a national protest, a national cry. And when Breonna Taylor, she was killed in her own apartment, in her bed, sleeping. You didn't really see the as big a turnout. It it was in waves, and it seemed as though every now and then you'd have a protest in the name of Breonna Taylor, and you'd have a group, and the group wasn't that large. And then it started to catch on in other places. It took a while for anybody to really get out there and speak out on the issues of women of color and women in general when it comes to women's abuses against women. And I noticed that here in America, that people will say, well, if you go to other countries, women don't have any rights and they get treated really badly and they can get raped. But I believe that in America, the same things that can happen in other countries could happen here in America and do happen. It just gets swept under the rug, or it's sugar coated, or it's disguised as isolated incidences as well. It's not highlighted as much, and women are always put at the back burner when it comes to domestic violence, and it's highly ignored. And that's what I mean by that. And this violence against women surging, I think it already was happening. It's just now it's more evident that they're getting more calls about it because people have to stay confined to their house or their apartment because of the pandemic. And so out of Washington, there's a call that says there's an increase in domestic violence cases during COVID pandemic that has been a renewed push to reauthorize Violence Act, Women's Act, and so and the president-elect Joe Biden has expressed commitment to renew this act that expired. It expired last year, but he faces a tough challenge if Republicans keep control of the Senate. And so it's basically saying that Republicans are blocking things, and among some of the things, other than just this thing here, you have the stimulus, and that's a big thing that they have a lot of concern over as well, getting money to a lot of Americans who are suffering financially. And so that also can bring on domestic violence, not having any food in the home, not being able to know, how you're going to pay your mortgage and your rent, and then you direct your frustrations out on the closest person to you. And if that person is no longer able to work, or that person is no longer able to bring in any income, it heightens the stress. But if there were already challenges in the relationship prior to this, it's probably even worse now because of what is going on in a lot of the lives of people right now. There's a huge crisis with this COVID pandemic. And so it's basically saying that but an increase in domestic violence calls and arrest across the country may put pressure on Senate GOP to restart the stalled authorization efforts. So there have been some situations that have been going on. They haven't really been televised. Um, I wonder what life would be like if some of these incidences were televised as much as some of the racial incidences, crimes against women. Um, a lot of times women's abuses against women is ignored. It's not taken serious. A lot of times the blame is placed on the woman. What did you wear? What did you do? Why were you there? Um, and what relationship did you have to the perpetrator? And all of these things come into play. And so it says the issues didn't just start with COVID, but COVID has made them even starker. So this person named Kristen Stewart, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy, Futures Without Violence, a nonprofit organization focused on ending domestic and sexual violence. So there is also sexual violence in relationships. And I just want to stop for a moment because I usually read these articles, but I'm probably not going to read all of this. The reason why is because it feels as though we never knew that these programs even ever existed, because I don't think women that are in abusive relationships really, if they're really, really wanting help, even if they knew how to access, I don't believe that they access these programs unless they're in a situation where they've probably endured a lot of abuse for many years and they've finally gotten at their wits' end and they're exhausted with getting beat up or emotionally or physically abused. And I think it's not just abuse against women, it's also abuse against the children, abuse against not only physical violence, the act of physical violence, but there's emotional violence that takes place. And I will say this, that there are situations where women that are in abusive relationships, and I'm going to basically, how would you say, go on something that I know of that happened to someone that I know, where you could be in a relationship with someone and you could have an apartment or a house together, and that person will take the keys and leave you with no keys. Your name's not on the lease or the mortgage, and you have no place to go, and you feel trapped in that relationship. So they can use things, forms of means of stability. And what's going on right now, pandemic, people are worried about getting evicted. So see yourself as a person in relationships that's abusive, where it's not only physically abusive, but mentally and emotionally abusive, where you're basically at the mercy of that other person. and you know you have no income, nowhere to go. And if that person has their name on the property, their name on the car registration, they have the keys to everything, and you have the keys to nothing. And what they say goes. There are relationships that are like that, where you can't go anywhere unless he tells you. He's watching your every move. He's clocking when you come and go, who you're on the phone with, where you drive to, if you can even drive the car at all. Um, there's a lot of situations that are so abusive that it's not only the physical thing, it's an emotional and mental thing, where the person is pretty much as if they are a slave. They could also be a sex slave for that individual as well. And so there's some situations you wouldn't believe that are going on, and people have been in those relationships for years, and they've been going through it, and they have no defense. They don't have anybody speaking for them. It is something that they have endured, and they're trying to figure a way out, but they're afraid for their life, or they're afraid for their kids, because maybe they have kids by the person that's abusing them. So they don't know how to get out of a situation like that when everything is in that person's name: the car, the keys, the apartment, the house, maybe even the accounts, the financial end of it, the money. And so if they have kids by this person, the person may even use the kids as a pawn in the relationship and threaten them and tell them, if you leave, you'll never see your kids again. And I'll make sure of that. Maybe even make them look like they're an unfit parent when that's not what's going on. They've been abused, and they've been beaten, they've been emotionally abused, and so they're the mother or the parent of that kid, those kids, and they don't know how to get out of a relationship. They feel trapped, and the kids have built a bond with that abusive parent. So how do you get out of a situation like that? So it's not as easy, it's not as simple as people think it is. And so a lot of times women will get blamed. If you just had have cooked the dinner, if you just had made it like this, if you had just had done this, sometimes she'll blame herself for why she's being abused. And so she might have seen that while she was growing up. Maybe he saw that while he was growing up, and that's what happened in their households, and they have grown accustomed to that lifestyle, and they think that's what a relationship is. Some people believe that. They believe that the reason why they're being beat is because their abuser is so in love with them that they'll use forms of punishment to show their affection. And so some people are into that kind of thing because they have been trained and groomed by the abuser to either think that way, or maybe they saw that in their lifetime with their parents and they think that is a normal relationship. Some people know it's not a normal relationship, but they've just been trapped in a situation like that and they don't know how to get out of it. And so there's a lot of things going on with those relationships. And a lot of times, if you're somebody on the outside and you know that this is wrong, it's abusive, you may be a neighbor, you may be somebody that you might know somebody's being abused. If you get in the middle of it, they look at you as the enemy, and then they start to target you like you did something wrong when you know something isn't right about that relationship. That person is being abused, so you stay out of it. And that's why a lot of times people are reluctant to call, because they don't want to get involved where the situation can get crazy and then that people begin to focus on them. And that abuser will then take their aggression out on a person that's trying to maybe be helpful in a situation that seems like it could be deadly. Um, so this right here, I feel like it's always happening. It's just now it's more evident that you have more calls because people have no other outlet. They can't go to the beach, they can't go to the park, they can't go to the movies, they can't go to restaurants hardly. Not very many places are accessible as they were, maybe very few. And so there's no way to escape the abuse because it's right in your face and you have to be there with it 24/7. And so these lockdowns make it hard for the family, the kids, the woman um, who is going through a situation like this. And so I noticed that with Breonna Taylor's death, there hadn't been any arrest. That's not an accident. I feel like women are not valued. Even in other countries where they say some women will have like a lot of abuse and it's more, extreme, I believe the same thing applies here in America. It's just swept under the rug. It's disguised as if they they are caring about women's rights over here. Women's rights is is something that exists, but it is not really a priority. And I believe this is the reason why you're going to continue to see articles like this. You're going to continue to see um, situations where women are always there's domestic violence that is going on, and you never see people that'll just take a camera and film some of the craziness, some stuff that I've seen and others have seen. It gets swept under the rug or ignored, and it's not taken as serious as, you know, something done towards someone else that isn't in a particular relationship. They might take a video of someone being murdered and of somebody being harassed or killed, but the same thing can happen to a woman. She can be murdered, she can be harassed, she can be killed, she can be raped, she can be framed, she can be killed by the police just the same as anybody else. And you don't see as much of that get caught on film as you do other situations. And I noticed that, and it's not looked at. And then if it is caught on film, the police tend to never really do any jail time. They don't pursue them like they do for another circumstance. Had it been like maybe a male, or it had been another circumstance, it's pursued a little more aggressively. But when it's a crime done against a woman, it's not pursued as aggressively. It's almost as if it's expected to happen. And it's almost where people have been desensitized to have any feeling or emotion towards that situation. It's like, oh well, attitude, and then it gets swept under the rug. It took so long for people to even come out and say anything on behalf of Breonna Taylor, and that's the sad part about it. And I feel like in the communities of color, and I'm gonna say this, domestic violence is an issue. It is bigger than you know, and it doesn't get exemplified as much as the racial issues do. Race is always an issue in the black community. Is what about racial issues? What about racial oppression and all of that? And domestic violence within communities of color is something that happens often. Now, other people may not tell the truth, they may not want to be honest about it, but it also happens often. Now, I'm saying communities of color, but I'm also saying it can happen in other nationalities, other groups, and I'm sure it does. But in communities of color, we're so protective. We're protective of our situation, so we'll focus on race issues. But when it comes to violence against black women in communities of color, in relationships of color, it is not even talked about that much. Don't hear about it. It's almost like it's normalized. And so I wanted to mention that. And so this right here, it's a lot worse than what this article is saying. Believe me, I'm sure of it. And, I've heard it, I've seen it, where if you'll hear, women getting, slapped around, and it ain't just slaps in the face either. Where they can get their arm broke, they can get their leg broke, maybe the baby's being tossed around the house. They're being threatened. Their lives are being threatened. If you leave this house, I'll kill you, that kind of stuff. They have everything in their name, and the woman can't go anywhere without the say-so of that individual. There are also religious cults, and let me be honest with you on this. There's some groups, they're very militant, and all they want to harp on is race. Race this, race that, race this, race that. But when it comes to women, they will beat the women into submission, and the women are supposed to do for the men. There are groups like that, and you have no say so, you have no defense. And a lot of people will rush to the aid of those religious groups and support those religious groups because they always want to talk about racial issues, but when it comes to violence towards their own female counterparts, that is swept under the rug. So this, I'm not surprised. Around in South LA, we have all these Hotep groups that they meet at the corner. They're spewing out all of their anger and frustration over what's going on because they're trying to get new recruits and they're trying to get new, young, impressionable black men to join these groups. But when it comes to the issues surrounding women, women are to be seen and not to be heard and respected. They're only meant for one thing, is to procreate and cook in the kitchen and be treated like a doormat. And a lot of this is not being talked about. It's always, and then too, let me be clear about this. You have other women of color who are so used to this treatment, are so used to that kind of mentality that they're may not be willingly accepting it, but they're accepting it because it has been indoctrinated in their DNA to accept that women are second class or put at the back burner. It is, you are there to serve for one purpose. You'll even have, which burns me up, where you have comedians that all they talk about is pursuing males and sexually pleasing them. And they'll do that in their comedy skits. But you never hear anything about, well, what about him respecting you? Or what about him pleasing you in a relationship and treating you like a woman, treating you like a human being, treating you like a person, even. And you never hear anything about that. You always hear these jokes, which I don't think, none of them are funny, about doing all these things, performing all these sex acts on males. And so when men hear that stuff, they think that's the way you treat women. Treat them like, streetwalkers. And so that is why you see a lot of this stuff going on with this violence, violence against women and this abuse, and then they had to make this act, and they said it expired, and so I wouldn't be surprised if these incidences skyrocket because you have so many people who don't take the lives of women's needs seriously. And that's not something that just happened because an act expired. This is something that has been ongoing and has not been addressed thoroughly. it's not been taken serious. I think the last time they made it seem serious was when OJ would have all those calls with Nicole Simpson, domestic violence situation, and she was a white woman. And that's when race comes into play, because when it's a white woman being abused, they tend to now look at it because the black man's abusing the white woman. We got to take this serious. Isn't that a switch? But if it was, him abusing his black wife, it's not taken serious. And so I noticed that. So that's when race comes into play when it comes to domestic violence. And so they don't talk about this. They tend to ignore these issues, and it's been going on for far too long. I think abuse shouldn't happen to either race of women, but I noticed that when it has to do with a black man abusing a white woman, then they focus on domestic violence, and that is wrong. I think you should focus on it not just when it's a black man abusing a white woman. You should focus on when men are abusing women, period, no matter what the race. So it just is sad. This is a cycle that continues, and it never ends. It goes on and on and on. And then you have women that they basically support some of this stuff. They make it look like, oh yeah, it was what she was wearing. You'll have some women that they just want to be in a relationship. It may not be a healthy relationship. They just want to be in a relationship. They're so desperate for some kind of companionship, even if it's a no good situation. They just want a situation. And because of the shortage, and let me be honest here, the shortage of decent black males here in neighborhoods of poverty, because if they're not jailed, if they don't have felonies, if they can't get a job, it's either something's wrong with them, they've got a mental issue, maybe they're crazy, or they're a wife beater, or they're on drugs. All of the decent dudes are not really readily available. And, it's always something wrong with them. So if there's any type of attention, they just are desperate for that, and they want that kind of attention, even if it's somebody no good. So they'll support all this bullshit. And then next thing you know, they get just what they want, a man. Maybe not a good one, not a gentle one, not a decent one, but a man. And that's what you're going to get. Somebody that he's not even that. He's just somebody, he's taking up air and space, is abusive, extremely violent, and he's not really in the best interest of being around your kids and being a family person and doing the right things by you. He's eating up your food, and he won't help you with any of the bills. And so I've seen this happen in these neighborhoods where the guy, he's able-bodied, he's, nice and strong and everything, and he has the look, but he doesn't want to work. Just wants to eat up, sit and play video games all day and eat up the food. He's eating up more cereal than the kids are. And he's talking that talk, and the only thing he can provide is maybe sex, and he's probably not really doing the right things because he's out eyeballing all the other women in the neighborhood. And if you're not looking at him, he's mad at you because he thinks he's God's gift to women. And if you don't have an interest in him, it's something wrong with you instead of him. Well, first off, he doesn't have a job. He's not looking to do the right things, and he's treating his girlfriend like a rag doll. Because if he's not punching on her, he's emotionally abusing her, lying to her. She's at work during the middle of a pandemic while he's in the house on the phone calling women. And so I've seen these things go on. Or you have a relationship where maybe he's not a cheater, but he's a wife beater. So this is what's going on. And so she can't breathe, she can't move, she can't go out the house without him snapping his fingers and telling her where you going, where you been, what you putting on, what you doing, and he's beating the brakes off of her. And this is all she can get. And so then you have women who just, they see all that and they're like, you know, I'll be by myself because they know it's crazy. So you can't fault women for saying, you know, I give up. I don't want any of that. And they choose to be celibate or be by themselves because they don't want the foolishness and the craziness. And they know what the outcome's going to be. It's going to be disappointment all the way around 180. So that is what I have seen. I haven't seen anything different, nothing spectacular, nothing new. And so this does not surprise me. This is one of many articles that you probably see, but women get abused in the Black community. A lot. A lot. I'm telling you this. And so it isn't talked about. It's taboo. It's almost like it's accepted. And it isn't accepted, but it's accepted. It's like it's ignored. And so I'm going to let this video go. But this right here, it upsets me because when they say violence against women surges during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, this is not a surge. This is something already has surged. You're just now seeing this because you're getting more calls because people are locked in. This has already been happening, whether you got an act or not. So having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening. Be safe out there. This is not anything new. It's not new.